Folks, it's that time of year. It is time for your official Benchwarmer brand mid-season NFL awards. MVP, Rookie of the Year, Offensive and Defensive Player of the Year, you guys know the drill. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna give you guys my winners for each mid-season award, the guys that I have finishing in second and third place for those awards. Then we'll have some honorable mentions, and I'll tell you guys whether I think the winners I picked for each award will actually win that award at the end of the season. Because remember, these are mid-season awards. Just because guys have performed a certain way so far does not mean they're gonna perform the same way the rest of the season. Now, before we get into it, this video is once again brought to you by Jack Links, so go out and get yourself some Jack Links protein snacks today. But without further ado, your mid-season awards. And how about we start with the kids? For Offensive Rookie of the Year, I'm going with CJ Stroud. Look, Offensive Rookie of the Year, much like MVP, often skews toward quarterbacks, but up until recently, there weren't any quarterbacks worth considering. Of course, Anthony Richardson had an electric start to the season to the point where we thought he might breeze his way to this award, but he went on IR. Bryce Young hadn't played that well. Will Levis only just recently got a shot, so that only leaves one man, and it's a man who has absolutely turned up his production lately, CJ Stroud. So the young buck signal caller down in Houston is definitely the favorite for this award right now, and my personal pick, but who else is in contention? How about Los Angeles Rams breakout wide receiver Puka Nacua? Now, if you guys did watch my Fantasy Football Awards video, you know it was heavy on the Puka Nacua hype. And rightfully so. This guy came out of nowhere to be one of the most productive receivers in the NFL this year. So productive, in fact, that he is currently fourth in the league in both receptions and receiving yards. Again, if no quarterback had broken out, I think Puka Nacua could have had a cakewalk to this award. But if anyone else were to stand in his way, it's probably the guy who's excelled in the one category that Puka has not, and that's receiving touchdowns, the player being Jordan Addison. Addison has 7 receiving touchdowns, tied with Stephon Diggs for second in the NFL behind only Tyreek Hill. The guy just has a nose for the end zone. You can't really put it any other way. Honorable mention goes to Devon Achane, who I think could have been a front runner for this award had he not gotten injured. I mean, he was off to a torrid pace to start the year. Maybe he'll put himself back in the conversation when he comes back, who knows? But as of now, this is CJ Stroud's award to lose, and I do think he ultimately comes away with it at the end of the season. Now for Defensive Rookie of the Year, we are going with none other than the Eagles' Jalen Carter. Look, I said it when it happened, but allowing Jalen Carter to fall to the Eagles in the NFL draft should have been considered a federal crime. The Eagles had just lost Javon Hargrave to their conference rival, the San Francisco 49ers, and it seemed like they might have a hole on their defensive line, until the rest of the NFL allowed arguably the best prospect in the entire class to fall to the Eagles at number 9 overall. He's the second highest graded interior defensive lineman behind only Dexter Lawrence, according to PFF, and he has the 4th highest pass rush grade for interior linemen behind only Lawrence, Aaron Donald, and Javon Hargrave. He's been a massive game wrecker for the Eagles anytime he's been on the field, so he's absolutely the winner of this midseason award. Other contenders for this award include the Seahawks' Devon Witherspoon and the Lions' Brian Branch. Both players have been massive difference makers in their team secondaries, and Brian Branch in particular has proven to be the great value that we all thought he would be when he got picked in the second round. But in the end, this award belongs to Jalen Carter, and I think it will belong to him at the end of the season as well. All right, enough children. I hate kids. Let's move on to Offensive Player of the Year, which I'm going to give to Tyreek Hill. This may be the most closely contested award at the end of the year. Because yes, you've got Tyreek Hill, my winner for right now, on pace to break the single-season receiving yards record held by Calvin Johnson and blow past the 2,000-yard mark. But you've also got A.J. Brown, who's having a career year and is only 71 yards behind Tyreek Hill. Both of these guys are blowing away their competition. The next closest wide receiver in terms of yards is Stephon Diggs with 834, a far cry off these guys who are both up over 1,000 already. But of course, they're not the only contenders. Just halfway through the season, Christian McCaffrey already has almost 1,000 all-purpose yards and a staggering 13 touchdowns. And that touchdown total is what's really wild because he's currently on pace to finish with 27.6 touchdowns. Obviously, you can't score 0.6 touchdowns, but this is just a result of having no real midpoint of the season because there's a 17-game schedule now. He's on pace for almost 28 touchdowns, and both running backs to ever score 28-plus touchdowns in a season won MVP, never mind Offensive Player of the Year. So I think this is going to be an awesome race to end the season, and while Tyreek Hill is my pick to win right now, I do think Christian McCaffrey will catch him. The Dolphins have a pretty tough schedule the rest of the way, and I think that'll be enough for McCaffrey to catch him for this award. Honorable mention goes to Raheem Mostert, who currently leads the NFL in rushing touchdowns with 11 and is tied with Christian McCaffrey for total touchdowns with 13. He's had an incredible first half of the season. I just don't think anybody really expects it to continue with Devon Achane due back, but gotta give credit where credit's due. Shout out Raheem. All right, on to Defensive Player of the Year, which we're gonna give to that psychopath in Cleveland, Myles Garrett. I think a lot of things are working in Garrett's favor. First of all, he's second in the NFL in sacks with 9.5, but the only guy he's behind is Danielle Hunter, who's played one more game. He's tied for first in the NFL in forced fumbles with Bradley Chubb and Trent McDuffie. And he's the centerpiece on the best defense in the NFL so far. That kind of narrative stuff matters. The Browns are allowing just 234 yards per game. The next closest is the Ravens with 262. My second place for this award is going to be TJ Watt. Has the same number of sacks as Myles Garrett. That's who Garrett's tied with for number 2 in the NFL. And one unique thing for Watt, he has 6 pass deflections on the year. That's the most for any edge defender. If you look at the list of guys with 6 passes deflected this year, it's like 90% defensive backs. And in third place, I'm going to go with Micah Parsons. He has 7.5 sacks this year, still very impressive. And he has 10 tackles for loss, that's tied for 4th in the NFL. He's also just the anchor of one of the other best defenses in the NFL. Honorable mention goes to Max Crosby. He is a monster, but he's going to have to set himself apart from these other guys in terms of sacks if he's going to win this award while being on a bad Raiders team. So look, I think the Defensive Player of the Year award is also going to be pretty closely contested at the end of the year, but I think ultimately Garrett will come away with this for narrative reasons that I mentioned before, and also another narrative reason: he's never won a Defensive Player of the Year award before. Crazy, right? Now before we continue, the award for best protein snack goes to Jack Link's. Today I've got their original beef jerky because who doesn't love the classics? But there are plenty of flavors out there for you to try. You've got teriyaki, peppered, sweet and hot, flamin' hot, along with their other snacks like tender bites and beef sticks. So if you want a great snack that's loaded with protein and is fit for an esteemed award show host like myself, try Jack Link's meat snacks today. All right. Back to the video. All right, let's just get this one out of the way. Comeback Player of the Year is going to be Damar Hamlin. Doesn't matter if it's a mid-season award, a quarter-season award, a three-quarter season award, Damar Hamlin's winning Comeback Player of the Year. He had it locked up the minute he returned to the Buffalo Bills as an active player, regardless of how much he's played this season. And I really hope everyone's just okay with that, because they should be. But I can still talk about some other guys who would be in consideration if this were any other year. Tua Tagovailoa being the first one. Obviously had several very scary incidents with concussions last year and is now balling out to the point where he's in the MVP conversation. We'll get to that in a few. So very happy for Tua that he was able to get back to it. Another potential contender, Breece Hall, tore his ACL last season and looks to be mostly back to his old self, and I think is in for a big second half of the year. And some honorable mentions. First, I'll go with John Mechie, who was diagnosed with leukemia and forced to miss his entire rookie season. He is now back in action with the Houston Texans, and it's great to see him back on the field. And another honorable mention, and this is more about what could happen, Aaron Rodgers. Look, I don't know what the deal is with this torn Achilles. He is hell-bent on coming back before the end of the season, but that would put his recovery time at about 2 months for an injury that typically takes 10 to 12. I don't want to be the conspiracy theorist that says he and the team lied about tearing his Achilles. I'm just saying I don't think you beat the normal recovery time by 8 to 10 months like that. Nonetheless, let's just pretend everything is as it seems and he tore his Achilles and comes back this year. Yeah, you got to put him in the conversation for that award. But regardless what happens, Damar Hamlin's going to win it, and that's how it should be. All right, I've kept you guys waiting long enough. The mid-season most valuable player in the NFL is Jalen Hurts. I really debated this one because honestly, there's no quarterback or any player that stands out above the rest right now. It's a very tight race to the point where I toyed around with picking a skill player for this award like Tyreek Hill or Christian McCaffrey. But I am going to go with Jalen Hurts. He's the quarterback on the team with the best record in the NFL, and he's the focal point of the most unstoppable play in the NFL, the tush push. And yes, of course, the offensive line, Jason Kelce especially, has just as much to do with that play as Jalen Hurts does, but you also probably don't achieve that play as often as they do without a quarterback that can squat 600 pounds. Hurts currently sits at 2,347 yards, 15 passing touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, while adding 316 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. My second place for this award right now is Josh Allen. Honestly, I probably would have given Josh this award if the Bills were in first place in the AFC East, but they're not. And I don't think voters are going to pick an MVP that didn't win his division. And then my third place for this award, I'll go with the guy who is leading the AFC East, and that is Tua Tagovailoa. Not just leading the AFC East, but also leading the NFL in passing yards and passing touchdowns. And the reason I have him below both Jalen and Josh is just lack of rushing contributions. Tua does basically nothing in the run game. But I wouldn't do anything in the run game either if I could just give the ball to Tyreek and let him run 80 yards, or give the ball to Raheem Mostert and let him run 80 yards, or give the ball to Devon. You get the point. And I want to say this because I feel like I might get a lot of comments about it. The reason I'm not including Lamar Jackson in this conversation is because I don't think his numbers stack up to these other guys. Don't get me wrong, he's playing incredibly well, but the stats aren't really there, and stats do matter for awards like this. We're talking about a guy with under 2,000 yards passing, 9 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. And of course, he's added value on the ground with 440 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns, but Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen are adding value on the ground too, with much better passing numbers. Again, this is not an indictment of how Lamar Jackson is playing the quarterback position. He's playing it as well as anybody can in the NFL. It's just with how good the Ravens defense has been and how good their run game has been lately, Lamar hasn't had to do a lot statistically. So I'm leaving him out of the conversation for now. Some honorable mentions I do want to touch on though, Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill. Again, if there was ever a year for a skill player to win MVP, it might be this one, just because none of the quarterbacks are putting up really crazy blow you away numbers. And one more honorable mention who is a quarterback, and this might surprise you a little bit, CJ Stroud. I know, maybe it's crazy to even put him on the outside looking in of this conversation right now, but if you look at his numbers, I don't think it's that crazy. Mostly because of the touchdown to interception ratio. You guys might remember Aaron Rodgers a couple years ago won MVP for throwing 37 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. And that was in a year where Tom Brady had a lot more passing yards and a lot more passing touchdowns, but they gave it to Rodgers because of that touchdown interception ratio that was just too gaudy to ignore. CJ Stroud's on pace right now to throw 2 interceptions all season. Look, a lot of things would still have to break right for Stroud to win MVP. The Texans would probably have to win the AFC South, and he'd probably have to beef up his touchdown rate a little bit, currently on pace for just under 30 for the season. I'm just saying I don't think it's impossible. With how well he's played this early, if he keeps improving, he might find himself at the back end of that conversation. But am I picking it to happen? Absolutely not. And the guy who I actually think will win the MVP at the end of the year is Josh Allen. I mentioned earlier how the Dolphins have a tough schedule coming up. Well, it's particularly tough for quarterbacks, and I think in the meantime, Josh Allen's going to keep padding those stats, and honestly, I think the Bills are going to win the AFC East. And yeah, I know Josh Allen turns the ball over a lot. He'll probably have to chill on that a little bit, but I'm still going with him as my end-of-year MVP. And finally, the midseason coach of the year, Dan Campbell. The Lions have been everything they were hyped up to be, and a lot of that credit goes to Dan Campbell. Completely changed the culture in Detroit and has gotten this team to first place in the NFC North with no signs of them giving it back. So we got to go with MCDC for this award. And I don't really think anybody's particularly close behind him, but if I got to pick a second place finisher, I'm going to go with DeMeco Ryans for right now. The Texans were not expected to be this competitive, and yeah, you got to give a lot of that credit to CJ Stroud, but a lot of it goes to the head coach as well. He's got this team fighting, and it wouldn't shock me to see the Texans make a wild card this year. And then after that, we've got Mike McDaniel. Look, he's got his team in first place. I think the only knock on him might be that his roster just has too much talent, but you can't deny that he's been able to maximize his players' skill sets like no other. He's also just a very likable guy, so it wouldn't completely shock me to see him win this award at the end of the year. Honorable mentions go to John Harbaugh, who has his Ravens looking as dominant as they ever have in his tenure. The only problem is that coach of the year tends to be a new coach of the year. That's what the award really is. It doesn't generally go to guys who have been around super long, but Harbaugh's still doing an incredible job in Baltimore. And then Kevin O'Connell, keeping this Vikings team afloat after a 1-4 start with Justin Jefferson going on IR and then Kirk Cousins going on IR. It's been an incredible job. And if the Vikings do stumble into a playoff spot, he will be in the coach of the year conversation for sure at the end of the year. And as far as who I think will win it at the end of the year, I'm still going with Dan Campbell. I see no sign of the Lions slowing down. Campbell was already one of the favorites to win this award coming into the year because the Lions were hyped up. And if you live up to that hype, you're going to win the award too. So shout out to him. Shout out to the Lions. What an incredible season for them so far. All right, there you have it. My mid-season NFL awards combined with who I think is going to win the award at the end of the year. Let me know which of my picks you guys agree or disagree with in the comments below. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I mean, what are you waiting for? As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.